A soldier finally heading home after months of deployment. He's exhausted, longing to see his family, and his a rare first-class ticket feels like a small blessing. But just as he settles in, a man in a suit sneers at him. A flight attendant approaches. "Sir, there's been a mistake." What happens next will leave the entire plane stunned and redefine what it means to stand up for yourself. Marcus Noak had seen his share of battles. From the heat of deployment overseas to the cold loneliness of missing his family, he thought he knew what struggle felt like. But today, as he sat quietly at the gate waiting for his flight to Chicago, he had no idea that a different kind of fight awaited him, not on a battlefield, but 30,000 feet above the ground. The flight had been delayed. The air buzzed with impatient travelers and scattered announcements. Marcus, wearing his simple military fatigues, held his first-class ticket tightly in his hand. It had been upgraded, a rare gesture of gratitude from the airline for his service. Normally, Marcus would have been stuck in coach, crammed into a narrow seat for hours. But today, for once, he allowed himself a moment of comfort. "Passengers seated in first-class may board now," came the announcement over the loudspeaker. Marcus stood, stretched his legs, and moved toward the gate. He smiled politely at the gate agent and handed over his ticket. "Enjoy your flight, sir," the agent said, giving him a genuine smile. "Thank you," Marcus replied. He meant it. As he made his way down the jet bridge, Marcus felt an unusual sense of peace. For months, he had lived in chaos, uncertainty, and noise. But today, this flight represented something different. It was the final leg of his journey back to his wife and kids. To home. Stepping onto the plane, Marcus was greeted by the plush luxury of first-class seats, wide, leather, and inviting. His seat, 2A, was by the window. He tucked his carry-on into the overhead bin, sat down, and fastened his seatbelt with a sigh of relief. Across the aisle, a man in a crisp navy suit, briefcase at his side, and an expensive watch on his wrist, watched Marcus with a thin, disapproving frown. Marcus caught his gaze briefly, but the man looked away, almost scoffing. Marcus ignored it. Faced worse stares before. Moments later, a flight attendant appeared, a woman with a practiced smile and a name tag that read Brenda. "Excuse me, sir," Brenda said, her voice polite but strained. "There seems to have been a mistake. I'm going to need you to move to another seat." Marcus blinked. "A mistake? This is my seat," he said calmly. "I have a first-class ticket." Brenda's smile faltered. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Yes, I understand. But we, have another passenger who would prefer to sit here. We've arranged a seat for you further back in the cabin." Marcus followed her glance to the man in the suit, who now smirked openly. He wasn't hiding his satisfaction at all. More comfortable? Marcus realized exactly what she meant, and his stomach turned. Taking a deep breath, he met Brenda's gaze. "I'm sorry, Mum, but this is my assigned seat. I've had a long deployment, and I'd like to stay here." The smirk vanished from the man's face. He scowled and leaned forward. "Do we really have to go through this? Just move him already," he snapped. Brenda's smile disappeared completely. "Please, sir," she said to Marcus, her voice now clipped. "If you could just move to 17B, we'd really appreciate it." "No," Marcus said simply. Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, she turned and stormed up the aisle, leaving Marcus sitting in uncomfortable silence. Across the aisle, the man glared at Marcus as if daring him to say something. Minutes later, the captain himself appeared, a tall man with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression. "What seems to be the problem here?" the captain asked, looking between Marcus and the suited passenger. Before Marcus could respond, the man in the suit jumped in. "The problem is he's sitting in my seat and won't move. I paid for this seat." The captain frowned. "Let me see your tickets, gentlemen." Marcus handed his over without hesitation. The captain inspected it, then turned to the man in the suit. "Sir," the captain said, his voice steady, "your ticket is for 17B. This passenger is correctly seated in first class. The man's face turned red. But. You'll need to take your assigned seat, the captain said firmly. Now. The man sputtered, then stood abruptly, grabbing his briefcase and stomping toward the back of the plane. Whispers rippled through the cabin as passengers watched the scene unfold. Brenda returned, her face pale. The captain shot her a pointed look. "Let's make sure there are no more mistakes on this flight," he said sharply, before disappearing back into the cockpit. Marcus sank into his seat, relief washing over him. But even as the plane took off, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this wasn't over. As the flight climbed higher, the tension lingered. Brenda avoided Marcus's gaze, her hands trembling slightly as she served drinks and snacks. Then the turbulence hit. The turbulence started with a small jolt. A ripple ran through the cabin, rattling the drink trays and causing a few gasps. Marcus had spent months riding in convoys over pothole-strewn dirt roads, barely flinched. But the sudden shake wasn't the problem, it was the way everything shifted. The tension that had quietly simmered in the air between Marcus and Brenda erupted like steam escaping a cracked pipe. Brenda stumbled into Marcus's aisle, narrowly avoiding a spill. "Sir, can I take your drink?" she said stiffly, not meeting his eyes. Marcus couldn't blame her, though. She was clearly under pressure. After what felt like an hour, the turbulence eased. Marcus tried to relax. He leaned back in his seat, gazing out the window. Miles below, clouds scattered across a stretch of deep blue. For a moment, the beauty of it tugged at his heart. That's when he noticed someone standing at the edge of his peripheral vision. A teenage girl, no older than 15, stood just outside the first-class cabin curtain. She clutched a small notebook and nervously approached. Before anyone could stop her, she made her way to Marcus. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Her voice wavered, but her eyes held a surprising steadiness. Marcus turned to her, confused. "Hey there, can I help you?" The girl hesitated, glancing at the aisle like she expected to be dragged away any second. Then, she held out the notebook. On the front was a colorful doodle of an American flag. "My dad's in the army too. I just wanted to say thank you for everything you do. And sorry for how people are treating you." For a moment, Marcus couldn't find his voice. The girl's words hit him harder than any battlefield explosion ever could. The simplicity of her gesture, innocence in its cut through the ugliness of the earlier tension, like a ray of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Thank you," Marcus said softly. He smiled and took the notebook, his fingers tracing the flag. "What's your dad's name?" "James," the girl said proudly. "He's a mechanic. He fixes tanks and stuff." "You tell James he's a hero," Marcus replied. The girl beamed, nodded, and ran back toward the coach before the flight attendants could even react. Marcus sat still for a long time, holding the notebook in his hands. The peace didn't last. The curtain separating first class from coach suddenly snapped open, and he appareed the man from 17B. His face was still flushed, his briefcase clutched like a weapon. It was clear he hadn't come for peanuts and soda. "Hey," the man barked, pointing a finger at Marcus. "Are you happy now? You caused all this drama for nothing." Marcus glanced up, unfazed. "I didn't cause anything. I'm just sitting where I was assigned. This seat should have been mine." The man growled. His voice was too loud, drawing stares from every passenger nearby. "You don't deserve." "Excuse me." Marcus's voice was low, measured. His posture didn't change, but his words cut through the man's rant like a knife. "You want to finish that sentence?" The man froze, his confidence faltering. Passengers watched closely. Some of them, including a woman 2 rows back, whispered audibly. "Is he serious? He's yelling at a soldier? That guy's got nerve." A businessman seated a few rows away in 1C chimed in. "Just sit down, man. You're embarrassing yourself." But the suited man wasn't finished. His pride was bruised, and instead of backing down, he doubled down. The entire cabin went silent. The captain had emerged from the cockpit, his towering figure casting a shadow over the scene. He looked down at the man in the suit with the kind of stare that could make anyone shrink 2 inches. "I believe I told you to remain in your assigned seat," the captain said coolly. The man stammered, but he... "Enough." The captain held up a hand, silencing him instantly. He turned toward Marcus, his expression softening. "Sir, on behalf of the airline, I apologize for this unnecessary disruption. Please enjoy your flight." Then, he turned back to the man. "As for you," the captain said, his voice dropping to a level that seemed to vibrate through the air, "I suggest you sit down and stay quiet for the remainder of this flight. Or, if you prefer, we can make an unscheduled landing and arrange for airport security to escort you off the plane." Gasps rippled through the cabin. The man turned crimson, clenching his jaw as though biting back every curse word he wanted to scream. He glanced around and saw every pair of eyes on him. Reluctantly, he snapped his briefcase shut and stormed toward the coach section. The curtain swished closed behind him. It started as a soft clap from the businessman in seat 1C. Then another passenger joined. And another. Within seconds, the entire first-class cabin erupted into applause. Even some voices from coach cheered through the curtain. Marcus didn't know what to do. He sat there, stunned, as the applause washed over him like a wave. When the noise died down, Brenda finally approached him again, this time looking far more human and far less robotic. "Mr. Noak," she said softly, "I'm so sorry for everything that happened earlier. It wasn't right, and I'll be filing a report." Marcus gave her a small, forgiving nod. "Thank you, I appreciate it." And she hesitated, then smiled. "If you need anything at all, just ask." The rest of the flight passed in peace. Marcus sat back in his seat, holding the notebook the young girl had given him. It wasn't just a gesture, Anna Maria, it was a reminder of what he was heading home to. Family, kindness, gratitude. When the wheels finally touched down in Chicago, Marcus exhaled, his journey complete. As passengers filed off the plane, many paused to shake his hand, pat his shoulder, or simply whisper, "Thank you." And somewhere in coach, a girl named Emily Wo's father fixed tank smiled, knowing she'd made a small difference that day. As the plane taxied to the gate, Marcus remained seated, taking a moment to absorb it all. The hostility, the unexpected kindness from the teenage girl, and the applause. It was a lot for one flight. For all the miles H traveled, this short journey home had felt like 1,000. When the overhead chime sounded, passengers slowly began to stand, gathering their belongings. A flight attendant announced, "Thank you for flying with us, and welcome to Chicago." Brenda approached him with a soft smile. She looked calmer now, less like someone trapped in a bad situation, and more like herself. "Mr. Noak, thank you for your service. And I hope you enjoy your time home." Marcus nodded appreciatively. "Thanks for taking care of things up here." She hesitated before adding, "And that girl? She wasn't wrong. People do appreciate what you've done, even if some forget to show it." Her words stayed with him as he rose, grabbed his small duffel bag, and walked toward the door. The terminal was busy, full of travelers reuniting with loved ones. Kids ran toward their parents. Spouses embraced as though months had passed. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of familiarity settle over him. Chicago had always been home, but after all those years in combat zones, it almost felt like a dream. He spotted him immediately. Near the baggage claim stood an older man in a worn Chicago Cubs cap. His posture was slightly hunched with age, but his shoulders were broad, and his eyes sharp, eyes that Marcus had inherited. It was his father. "Pops," Marcus called softly, but his voice carried. The old man's head snapped up, and for a moment, it was as if he didn't know whether to run or stand still. Marcus barely had time to react before his father broke into a brisk walk, faster than Marcus had seen him move in years. When they met, his father grabbed him in a strong hug, holding him tighter than Marcus expected. "Welcome home, son," his father said, his voice thick with emotion. "I missed you so damn much." "Missed you too, Pops," Marcus replied quietly. For a minute, neither of them let go. There was nothing else to say. This was enough. As they began walking toward the parking lot, Marcus noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. A small group of fellow passengers from the flight stood nearby. Among them was the teenage girl Emily, holding her notebook and smiling shyly. Her mother was with her this time. She gave Marcus a respectful nod before nudging her daughter forward. "Hi again," Emily said softly. "Hey, Emily," Marcus said, crouching to meet her eye level. "You're following me, huh?" She giggled nervously. "No, I just wanted to give you this." She handed him a folded piece of paper. Marcus unfolded it carefully. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of a soldier standing under an American flag, surrounded by little yellow stars. At the bottom said, written in neat handwriting, "Thank you for being my hero." Marcus stared at the picture for a long moment, his throat tightening. "This means more to me than you know, Emily," he said, his voice soft. "Can I tell my dad you liked it?" Marcus smiled, his eyes glistening. "You tell your dad I loved it. And tell him I said thank you for his service too." Emily's grin stretched from ear to ear. "Okay." Herman mouthed a quiet thank you before ushering Emily away, leaving Marcus standing there with the picture still in his hands. Home was quiet but comfortable. Marcus's father drove the old pickup truck through familiar streets, pointing out which neighbors had moved, which houses had been renovated, and what landmarks still stood unchanged. When they reached home, Marcus saw the old front porch, the same swing H sat on as a kid. Nothing had changed, but it felt new somehow, like something waiting to welcome him back. Inside, the smell of home-cooked food greeted him. Marcus smiled as his father set down the duffel bag and began rummaging through cabinets. "I made your favorite for dinner." "Don't even try to argue," his father said gruffly. Marcus chuckled. "I wouldn't dare." As they sat down at the small kitchen table, his father cleared his throat, fiddling with his napkin. "You know, I heard what happened on your flight." Marcus looked up sharply. "Who told you that?" "The news spreads fast, son. People saw it, and some lady posted about it online. Said a soldier got treated unfairly, but ended up getting the respect he deserved." Marcus exhaled slowly. "It wasn't all bad, Pops. Some people surprised me." His father nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I'm glad they did. You've been through enough to deserve a little respect." He paused, then added softly, "I'm proud of you, Marcus. Always have been." Marcus's chest tightened. His father wasn't the type to hand out praise often. It made these words hit even harder. "Thanks, Pops," he said quietly. That night, Marcus sat on the front porch swing, the air cool and peaceful. Crickets chirped in the distance, and the stars overhead were bright. He pulled out Emily's picture, staring at the words she had written. "Thank you for being my hero." A small smile tugged at his lips. For so long, H carried the burden of his service alone, unsure if anyone really understood or cared. But Todia's simple flight home had reminded him that even in the darkest moments, light could still shine through. Heroes didn't ask to be called heroes. They didn't seek recognition. But sometimes, the world reminded them that what they did mattered. And for Marcus, that was enough.